doing public work, you can always be sort of part of that discussion. And it's not an enormous group, but it's a sizable group of people that will really, vet your work thoroughly and just make it better. And so that's a real benefit to being on the public side. On the in terms of the communication internally, um, there's sort of a misnomer out there that a lot of analytics jobs are technical jobs when they're as much or more so communications jobs, because you're taking information that's completely unfamiliar about a subject that the people you're talking to have a great deal of expertise and experience with, and trying to teach them something new with that new kind of avenue of information. And so that's both a linguistic and a sort of a presentational challenge in terms of convincing the people who are making decisions, A, that you know what you're talking about, and B, they can understand what you're talking about. So those are sort of the twofold challenges that are throughout kind of the team side process.
So when the Trailblazers contacted me about becoming a consultant for them, they had nobody that did data analysis per se. They had some people kind of dabbled in it on the side, but like I can remember going out to Portland to talk with them about the role and what kind of things I would be expected to do. And I remember them pulling out this binder, and it had like player profiles in it, like statistics and scouting notes and that sort of thing. I mean, this is like a printed thing, right? So like in a month, it's out of date, and it's like, so one of the first things I did with them was to set up an internal system where, their statistics could actually be updated overnight, and, sort of like a basketball reference, but for the Trailblazers, like tailored for them. So they told me what stats they wanted to see and how they wanted it to be set up. I built a thing for them that allowed their scouting reports to be entered online, because they didn't have that before. It was sort of, they were in email or they were on printed paper or something. Right. And so, a lot of that early on work was just me building sort of this base for them. Now I'm sure that's long gone, and they've gone on to something way bigger and better, but, they didn't have that. And so that's what I needed to do at first. And since this was sort of the early stages of basketball analytics, they did not really want me diving into the X's and O's per se. They didn't want me communicating with the coaching staff, really. I was more like somebody that the front office could lean on. So they would say, for example, okay, here's a group of 5 players that we're interested in acquiring. We want to hear your thoughts on them, but we only want to know what the numbers are telling you. We don't want to know, what you're seeing on video or in person, because that's what their scouts are for. And we don't care about rumors about this player, because we get that stuff from other GMs and so on. So they're like, just focus on the numbers. Tell us whether or not this player is a good fit. What are his strengths, what are his weaknesses, and so on. And so, yeah, it was mainly a role where the front office could lean on me for recommendations or me putting the thumb down, to a certain player that they were interested in acquiring.
Awesome. Just for a general question about basketball, we've kind of seen the sport fundamentally change in the last couple of years with the Golden State Warriors and the three-pointer, and the Rockets and their small ball. And so what do you, as the experts, think is maybe the next avenue for analytics to change the game? And I know, Neil, you've done a lot of work with player tracking and how that could help us in the future.
Well, that's a good question for sure. In terms of thinking of tangible things, I can't think of anything off the top of my head, but as a person who works with the player tracking data, the thing I want to happen next in that space is to have what is called like pose estimation data linked to the player tracking data. Right now, it's just basically just the GPS coordinates of the players 25 times a second. And you can do a lot of great work with that, but there's only so much you can do with what's basically the center of mass for a player, right? So if we were able to have the entire coordinates for every single body part that they had, I think the analysis could get even granular, and that could really help with things. So that's where I think is like the next frontier to go in terms of data for basketball.
Andre, do you have any thoughts on how analytics is changing the game?
Yeah, the way you phrased the original question with kind of like the 3-point revolution and kind of what's up next, I kind of feel like we might kind of get a pendulum swing back towards what makes excellent defense, right? Like, so if the NBA was built on the concept of big men, because big men shot the efficient shots near the rim and they could stop the other team from shooting efficient shots at the rim. And that kind of, drove the league for decades, right? Up until recently. But then like the advent of the 3-point line, and more importantly, in the last decade or so, teams really figuring out how to spam that and really get those high efficiency shots has changed offenses, but it's also changed defenses, because that big man that camps out in the lane and blocks shots, he doesn't necessarily do as much for what's happening out on the perimeter where a lot of the action is now. And so I wonder if we'll start to see more of a emphasis and a premium when it comes to individual defenders and how they fit into team defense that takes advantage of those things. Like, instead of looking for the next Rudy Gobert, if we're looking more at Draymond Green types that can blow up the pick and roll and switch as needed and able to help and rotate. And we're seeing defensive schemes that are taking more advantage of players like that, but we don't typically know them on a first name basis the way we know the guys that can knock down the threes. And so I'm wondering if and even Neil was talking about kind of the scout-based analytics, like, defense is the part of the game that's least covered in the box scores. If you have a plus-minus based approach, you can kind of see it. But I think the scouting is where you can really start to tease out, no, this is what good defense is. And, a guy like Daniel Tice for the Celtics was number 2 in the NBA in defensive real plus-minus this year. But most casual fans didn't even necessarily know who he was. And even those that watch basketball, I wouldn't necessarily think that people would think he was one of the best defenders in the NBA. And I wonder if that will change, that type of thinking will change over the next few years as we pay more attention to these type of things.
It's about 5 different thoughts going on there. So first one first is, I think that it is emphasizing analytics almost to say that the stylistic change in the game is due to analytics. I think that there's certainly influence, but I think Mike D'Antoni got to his preferred style of play more through kind of traditional basketball means. Is like, okay, what's the best way to get shots at the rim? Create more space. What's the best way to create more space? Shoot more threes. Okay. And that's the same sort of insight that you get from doing crunch numbers in different ways. So it's not, I don't want to say it's completely the nerd's fault, the way the game has changed. In terms of what's next, I think I agree with Andre that the defense is kind of next. It's always, the offense makes a leap forward in some way. Then there's a defensive adjustment to counteract that. We're still playing, the NBA still plays defense not terribly different than they did 7 or 8 years ago, even though offenses are playing completely differently. And just kind of the math of the situation changes so much. Like the Heat were able to be an effective defense swarming the ball because if the offense reversed the ball twice and got an open jumper, it was a power forward shooting a baseline 18-footer. Okay, you don't want to give up that open shot, but that's fine. If it's suddenly, a small forward taking a 3 from the corner, then you're done. And so that small change in how offenses have played hasn't fully been accounted for in kind of the overall defensive scheme. And I think that kind of through use of tracking data, especially with some of the pose and sort of eye-line stuff that Neil's working on, can probably help design schemes that are better able to, account for players in the most dangerous spots on the floor and figuring out when players aren't in dangerous spots on the floor, so you can, give them less attention.
Yeah, I think that's a good point. I think the defenses you've seen from the Heat and the Raptors in the last 2 playoffs kind of are probably emblematic of what's to come. I think in general with defense, I think going forward, you can be much more specific in your approach, and that can probably lead to much more extreme versions of defensive looks, like the box and one, stuff like that. So that's where I think we'll probably see a much a drastic change in the defensive approach versus just kind of doing what's normal, doing man to man, and then wondering if you're going to switch or go over or under the pick, that type of stuff. I think that's where there's a whole lot to be gained there, and that's where the Heat and the Raptors, their coaching staffs would probably speak to that very well. And it's just a matter of that kind of going, everyone copying it across the league to that degree.
Also, less of an X's and O's thing, but I think also there's going to be a lot of advancement in terms of how does what a player does when he's away from the court affect his performance on the court? So in terms of health and nutrition and those sorts of things, what does this player eat? When does he eat? What is he eating? Is he lacking certain things? How much does he drink? Is he well hydrated? How much is he sleeping? Those sorts of things. So how do those things all tie into then player performance? There's this thing now that athletes can wear. It's called a Whoop band, which gives all sorts of performance data. And I don't have one. I don't know how accurate it is, but it'll do things like it'll tell you, okay, you're 87% recovered from the hard effort that you put out yesterday or something like that. So those sorts of things where I think teams will look at that, and then it'll kind of help them figure out, like, okay, how much do we want to push a player on this particular day, or how much can we expect out of a player on this particular day, or what does this player need to do off the court to make him a better player on the court?
So we have a question from Ben in the audience who wants to know a little bit more about the difference in analytics jobs in the industry that are more program-based versus communication and presentation-based. Going off of the different answers between Seth and Justin when they're in their industry experience.
I guess from the team side, since I have the most recent experience, I can sort of the jobs kind of break down into different buckets. There's on one hand, there's more of the data architecture, database side, especially as tracking data becomes more available for more seasons, and looking forward to what the kind of things that Neil's working on with pose data. Just the amount of, like, the size of the data we're working with is going to increase greatly, if not exponentially. And so having, good data architecture to be able to store and call and all those things is kind of one set of jobs. Then there's programming jobs, whether it's, front end, back end, UI, UX kind of stuff. A lot of the stuff that Justin was talking about in terms of creating, dashboards, internal websites, apps, stuff like that for use in the broader organization. There's kind of what might be called more, research and analysis jobs, which is really where the hardcore statistical and rigor and data science comes in terms of building and developing models and coming up with new metrics and answering basketball questions, really, through the use of data. And then all of those kind of get tied together with the ability to communicate those findings in the language of basketball to a lay audience. So, and those aren't hard and fast walls, but those roles, but those are kind of the 4-ish types of roles that exist on the team. Well, and one more, I guess, is, and it's in some places, most teams, it's a separate area where they have data people doing it. Was kind of the sports science area that Justin was talking about. But those tend to be more attached to kind of the training and medical staff rather than the front office per se, at least at this point.
Yeah, and I like those buckets the way that Seth laid them out. I guess my role is more towards the last extreme that he mentioned, or the next to last one, I guess, where I could do my job simply by understanding what the more hardcore analysts are doing and being able to translate that into something that can be communicated and be enjoyed by a lay audience. I don't necessarily have to generate any of the analysis or the data that I use when making arguments. I spend quite a bit of time on Justin's Basketball Reference, or the different blogs or websites that would generate the data. I just had to be able to understand it and communicate it. Now, that being said, it helps to be able to generate your own. And even now, I'm working at ESPN in a communications role, but I'm taking some time to try to learn more coding so that maybe I can start generating my own analytics if I have areas of interest, because there's enough overlap that being able to, understand the process enough to generate my own would make me more effective still at being able to communicate and tell the stories to others. So it was like those 4 or 5 buckets I think are really good, but on some level, there's some ability to overlap or cross over between the two.
I said this in the last panel I was on, so I apologize to those who are hearing it again, but more important than anything else is being able to ask the right questions. If you're clever enough to come up with the right questions, don't let your lack of database skills or programming knowledge hold you back. So if you're really good at formulating questions and figuring out how to answer them, you can figure out how to use a database on your own. You can figure out how to code on your own. MySQL is free. Go download it, put it on your computer, and start playing around with it and figure it out. It's not that hard. That's what I did. I had no formal training in databases or coding, but I figured it out along the way. And so, just because you're lacking certain skills, if you are clever enough to ask the right questions, you're clever enough to figure out how to do those things. And same thing with coding. Go get Python, go get Perl. They're free. Figure out how to use them. It's not that hard. It'll take some time at the beginning, but if you stick with it, it'll really pay big dividends in the end.
All right. Basketball has probably the most vocal haters of analytics in the media. Specifically, Charles Barkley has said a lot of things about analytics. And that brings up the question of this new age versus the old school scouting. And so in your experiences, how have you balanced that when communicating information to the general public or to certain teams? We can start with Neil on this one.
Sure, why not? That's where, I don't know. I think your approach should always not be mutually exclusive here. People like Charles Barkley played the game and are excellent basketball minds. To me, they have a mastery of the game that is almost more than anyone could possibly have. For me, analytics and using a database approach provides a different tool to the tool set. I was just talking to someone else the other day about scouting like basketball recruits or whatever. And if you were a human watching the games, I think that's going to give you the highest ceiling with respect to having a qualitative evaluation of a player. But are you going to be able to physically in person go watch 1,000 games in a year? No. But a database approach can, and it might not be as good qualitatively as the human eye, but it just brings a different thing to the table by being able to quantitatively compare such a wider set of information than a single human can. So to me, that's where I look at it that way, that it's bringing something else to the table that humans just simply can't bring, no matter how much of a subject matter expert they are. So I always value people who are experts in a field, people who have accomplished a lot in the field, because they're never going to go away. We always need their minds to help understand the game and help to see it in ways that, only so few people can. So, but yes, that's where it is frustrating at the same time that they're so sometimes, they're so rejectful, I guess, of new concepts. But I think that's where sometimes that's probably a sign that you're doing something good. Because you're eliciting an emotional response from them. I think that means that the stakes are high, and if it didn't matter at all, they would probably just ignore you. So the fact that they're reacting very strongly means that there's probably something there. Obviously, you don't want to be like a troll or something. That's very not productive. But if you are very confident in the research you've done and you have a lot of resources to back up what you're saying, and it's eliciting a response like that, then that's probably a sign of a good thing. And it's, progress is not a linear line as we're seeing in life, I guess, right? So sometimes there's going to be bumps in the roads, and you just have to have a long-term view with these things for sure.
Yeah. Piggybacking on what Neil said, so that's the that mindset and I think it was a set someone mentioned earlier, internet trolls. They that's a big part of what I call the barbershop arguments that I've had through the decades that kind of led to me coming here, is me being able to argue with you about, Magic Johnson versus, Oscar Robertson, if you're old school, versus Jason Kidd, and being able to break down, I think this player is better, and these are the reasons. And so I think it's important that analytics be taken as a field and as a concept for what it is. It's a toolbox for how you can evaluate the game, but it's also got to be put into context and tied into the game itself. And so if I were ever arguing on the air with Charles Barkley, I would never sit down in the argument and he says, Giannis Antetokounmpo is trash. And I say, well, his real adjusted plus minus is plus 7.32. Like that argument would never work. Instead, I have to say, no, he's excellent on offense. And what he does is he, draws enough attention that, he warps the defense and he's able to set up open jumpers. And maybe I'm looking through the scouting data and say, when out on the court with him, this player X shoots X, Y percentage higher than he does otherwise. And so it's like an effective use of an analytic to make a point, and it's not just using it as a standalone point. So I think it's really important to be able, like Neil mentioned, Barkley's an excellent basketball mind. Talk basketball with him. You know what I'm saying? Don't try to make it a math lesson. Talk basketball and use the numbers, because all NBA conversations deal with some type of number. If somebody is like, Jordan got 6 rings, they just quoted a stat to you. If they say, LeBron averaged 30, 10, and 10 in the finals, they're quoting stats. They're just stats that they're comfortable with. So if we're bringing stats that might be novel and might be illustrating something different, the point is to focus on what is being illustrated and just use the numbers as support, as opposed to beating people over the head with math that they may not really care to hear.
Yeah, I mean, I think that it starts from a misunderstanding of what quote unquote analytics is. This goes back to almost like the Moneyball days in baseball, where it was, Moneyball, that just means on base percentage. It's like, no, it means going after the undervalued stat at that point, or the undervalued attribute. At that point, the undervalued attribute was getting on base, so we went for that. It's not, analytics is not, oh, we're just going to shoot threes because that's analytics. It's like, it's what are we going to do that's most effective on the basketball court? And it's a lens of viewing the game that leads you to that, much the same way that the traditional kind of scouting eye is doing the same thing. And really 90% of the time you end up in the same spot. So there's a lot more areas of agreement than there are of disagreement. And sort of starting from there and having productive conversations about those areas where I see it this way, you see it that way. Let's, obviously that requires some good faith on both sides, which doesn't always exist on either side. Though one side kind of has the larger pulpit than the other. But I think it's breaking down the misunderstanding that this is it's like these rule, like it's analytics is somehow like a religious text of things that you do, rather than a process of understanding what's happening to have a better prediction about what will work well going forward. And that's kind of a tough mindset to get people to switch to take it from, using it as kind of a library resource to as Justin, I think, put it perfectly, like asking the right questions about basketball and using the data to answer them in productive ways.
Just one thing to add real quick is that I think a lot of people confuse analytics and trivia. They're not the same thing. Like if you follow me on Twitter, that's trivia. I'm always talking about, oh, this guy is the first person to do this since whatever, And I do that because it's fun, and I don't do it because I think it's some sort of rigorous exercise. It's just fun and interesting information, but it's not the same thing as analytics, and people need to make sure that they look at those things separately. Yeah.
All right. So we do have a question from Ashley that asks, with Corona kind of putting the NBA into a bubble, and now with the season potentially coming back and fans potentially coming back, how can analytics work to improve that fan experience in such a difficult time?
That is a very tough question. I think the only real directly analytical thing that could really help fan experience would be assessing whether or not you should allow fans in at any moment, and to what degree, and what would be the most effective way to do testing. There's a variety of tests right now, so which ones would be available in your market, available to give to fans, and how effective would that logistically work to bring them in. But I think right now the NBA is certainly in a really tough spot. They're a business that largely relies on fans coming into the arenas for the games, and this is obviously not the greatest scenario for that to happen. But I think that's where the teams will do everything they can to try to get as many fans as safely as they can in. I don't think they will probably be doing it the most effective way or with public health in mind. They'll have it from their business perspective. And yeah, we're just going to kind of have to hope that the public at large does what's in the best interest of everybody involved. But we'll see.
The Warriors actually came out with a plan. I think it was this morning.
Yeah,
They released about testing every person who came into the Chase Center. I don't know exactly how they're going to pull that off. I didn't read the entire thing, but the teams are thinking about how they can safely and effectively bring fans back. Whether or not they'll actually be able to do it, I don't know. It's like probably one of those things where in theory it sounds very good. In practice, it's going to be virtually impossible.
So I'll go a slightly different direction with this question. They're already doing it, like, getting to the point where fans are back in the stadium and back before the shutdown when they were. There's already a ton of that going on. With the business analytics group at the Bucks when I was there was as big or bigger than our kind of basketball analytics group, and that's everything from figuring out how many hot dogs to defrost for the game tonight based on any number of metrics to they actually figured out a way to in like the in-stadium app that they had when the new stadium opened a couple years ago. There's a beer me button where you just like press one button on your app and someone brings a beer to your seat. And that's obviously combining some programming and stuff, but also a lot of data work on the back end to figure out the kinds of things that would drive fans to stay in their seats and watch the game.
It removes the friction between a fan reaching for their wallet and not reaching for their wallet.
Right.
And that's very important for a business trying to generate revenue.
Yeah. And I think that, honestly, you're probably going to see something similar and possibly less healthy with like the rise of kind of in-arena gaming and real-time betting on games. That's obviously going to be hugely statistically and analytically driven. I'm of multiple minds about whether it's a good idea, but there's money to be made there.
Yeah, I was literally, that's where I was going to go. You know, I figured I was kind of going off the board from everybody else, and so you teed it up perfect, Seth. It's you know, instead of focusing on what could be done to try to get more people back into stadiums, they could focus on making the at-home experience more interactive, and more enjoyable to the fan, and you know, to the point that was just being made, like more likely for the fan to reach for a wallet to do something or another. You know, so whether that's an increased emphasis on fantasy basketball, you know, or sports gambling, or maybe even it's just uh, sharing potential analytics of interest with like the basketball purist. You know, right now, I know if someone's watching a game telecast on ESPN, guys like Neil are feeding really cool stats to the announcers for them to be able to pull out, you know, at dead balls, like, oh yeah, X, Y, and it could be trivia like Justin was talking about, or it could be something pertinent. You know, I always think back to watching one of the Jazz playoff games, and first play of the game, Doris Burke made mention of Rudy Gobert's real plus minus for defense to emphasize how good of a defender he was. So maybe it's sharing those types of analytics with fans and some type of feed that comes on the screen. You could purchase the Insider VIP seat, so you're watching from home, but you're getting, you know, this enhanced experience. You know, there's different ways to do it, but I personally have been of the mindset that a lot of times I enjoy watching a game from home more than I enjoy watching it at the arena, because of those types of conveniences, because I can sit in front of my computer, because I can, you know, take in the game in levels. I definitely feel like I see a lot more at home, or a lot differently at home than I do at the game. So if there's a way to kind of lean into that experience, if you can't come to the game, then we're going to give you these other positive things that do draw you in as a fan. That might be an approach I would take if I was the NBA or an entity that covers the NBA.
Thank you. And as we are almost out of time here, I'll pose a quick question to everybody. Who is the greatest basketball player of all time?
So, of course, you know, this is one that can start a fight. During the playoffs, I was on the radio, and someone asked me that question, you know, like meant to focus towards LeBron versus Jordan. And I made the whole show go silent because my answer was that I don't have either of them as my GOAT. I'm still old school. I think Bill Russell's the greatest basketball player that ever played. And, you know, and not just because he has 11 rings, but because he has 11 rings because of the impact he was making on the court and the innovations and the way that he played the game. So I think he's the best. I got crickets when I said that on the air. You know, everybody wants to hear Mike versus LeBron, and that's a conversation in and of itself. But since I've thrown my Russell out here, I'll step to the back end and let some of the others speak to that.
So yeah, you bring up a good point with Bill, which is like, if you're going to go for who's accomplished the most, it's obviously him, right? But that's typically the argument used for MJ over LeBron.
Mm-hmm.
For me personally, I guess it's LeBron. I grew up in Ohio. I certainly have a little bit of a bias to him, but I kind of also see it as like the competitive nature of the sport is always progressing, right? So it's much harder to accomplish something in the NBA in 2020 than it is in 1990. So I see it as like LeBron, like you're stepping on the shoulders of the guys behind you, right? Obviously, Michael Jordan had a huge cultural impact. He brought such a dynamicism to this sport that wasn't there before. Something I think I really realized with The Last Dance was how athletic he was versus everybody else when he came into the league. But that's where, to me, LeBron's just a much more complete package. He still has time to finish out his career, to have more accolades to compare up to Michael Jordan. And then I guess I'll just add that I totally expect someone 20 to 30 years from now to come along and be greater than both of them. That's just how I kind of see it as progress.
So I think there are 4 right answers to this, and which one of those you choose says as much about you. In Neil's case, his answer says he's from Ohio, but you can say LeBron, Jordan, Russell, or Kareem, and those are the acceptable answers. And and it from there, you're more arguing, assumptions about what matters than you are about like who's actually. Your measuring stick basically determines who's tallest once you get to that point. So for me, I probably, depending on the day, it's either LeBron or MJ, but I wouldn't be mad at anyone for any of those 4 answers.
I have 2 quick points I'll try to make here before time's up. So just regarding Bill Russell, and I'm not trying to detract from his accomplishments, but a lot of those championships came in an 8 and 9 team league where he only had to win like 2 rounds of playoffs to win a title. It was completely different. So
but does that make it harder or easier? Because that meant he was playing Wilt and Oscar and Jerry West every year. Like there were no easy paths where the number 1 seed gets upset in the second round.
Yeah, but I think also the variability in talent was a lot larger. Obviously, the U.S. population as a whole was a lot smaller, so therefore the population of possible NBA players is much smaller. Yeah, I don't want to get too far into those weeds, but just want to make that point.
Very valid.
Yeah, and then so my thing is when people ask me about greatest player of all time, I say it depends on what you really mean by that. Do you mean I can have this player in his prime for say 3 to 6 seasons, so like a player at his peak value? Or are you talking about the overall volume of his accomplishments, i.e. his career value? And so my answer is this: if you're talking about peak value and I could have this player for a period of 3 to 6 seasons, I would want Michael Jordan, because I think if you stack up LeBron and Jordan's seasons, you will see that, like, if you look at say the top 10, probably 7 of those seasons or so will be Jordan seasons, because at his peak, I don't think anybody could rival him. However, if you say, okay, you can have a player and he's going to be your franchise cornerstone for the next 12 to 15 seasons, then I'm starting to go LeBron's way, because the cumulative effect of his accomplishments is really starting to outweigh the cumulative effect of Jordan's accomplishments. So, okay, peak value, Jordan. Career value, I would go with James. So that maybe I'm weaseling out when I answer it that way, but I sort of, the reason I think that way is because Bill James wrote a book in the 1980s, so I'm dating myself here, called The Historical Baseball Abstract. And it's the best.
Still holds up. Still holds up.
Exactly. It's the best baseball book I've ever read. It's the old one too. The new one is not as good, but the old one. And there he made the point of, you really need to you need to clarify whether or not you are talking about peak value or career value. And in that book, he actually had 2 different lists. So he looked at players by position and ranked them by peak value and career value instead of just throwing them all in one bucket.
Yeah, and even, you could add another axis to that. If peak versus career was on your y-axis, your x-axis could be, are you talking about what they accomplished on the court versus their accolades? Like Neil mentioned when I mentioned Russell, that like he has a mountain of accolades. Interestingly, that's not why I picked him. I evaluate based on who do I think has the biggest on-court impact. And, as an individual, that doesn't even necessarily mean that you're winning the championship, because championships are very related to your teammates and your situation. And so things like that can change. So yeah, I agree, peak versus career. But I think also, you have to define what exactly is it that you're evaluating based around.
All right. Thank you all very much. It's very insightful. We're going to take a quick break here. And then coming up, we're going to have our football panel starting at 4 o'clock. I'd like to thank you all for coming. This was great.
Thanks, everyone.
Thanks for having us.
Thanks, Alex.